Well, welcome everyone. I'm Joanne Geer. I'm Executive Director for the Westchester Biotech Project. We are based in Westchester County, which is just north of New York City. And our whole mission is about bringing together researchers, data scientists, and engineers across all the different aspects of biomedical research. As part of our initiative to think about tomorrow's life science workforce, which is inside our career consortium, we are inviting some speakers today to talk about what employers want. We're going to hear today first we're going to hear about the Career Consortium from the co-chairs, who are Carla Romney and Ray Houston. And then we will hear from Sree Kant, who's the CEO of BAKX Therapeutics, Don Alexander at GeneCoda, which is a search firm that really has their hands on the pulse of the life science marketplace for individuals. And then we'll have a roundtable, and we'll be inviting you to introduce yourself and ask questions, make comments, and join the discussion. And I want to introduce Michael Welling, our co-founder. Michael, would you take it from here?
Thank you, Joanne, and good morning, everyone, or good evening, or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. If you're here in the Northeast, you are amidst this wonderful, ugly snow sleet combination. So hope everyone is safe and healthy wherever you may be. Today is an exciting conversation, kicking off a series of conversations, which we'll get to in a moment. But what you see on the screen at the moment is sort of our mission statement. Our goal since we formed 5 some odd years ago is enhancing human health by leading borderless initiatives and practical collaborations inspired by researchers, data scientists, engineers, and the communities that support them. Part of the sort of driving force behind the Westchester Biotech Project, for those of you who may be joining us for the first time or my first opportunity to meet with you, part of my sort of passion and drive is that my now 16-year-old son, and it's a happy ending story, was saved. His life was saved as a baby as a result of a rare condition that required significant international collaboration and research to devise a treatment plan. And this was back in 2006 when Zoom and all that wasn't exactly the norm. And so we know how valuable providing the platform and the safe space for folks to exchange ideas and build upon them is. And when we set out, and I say we because Joanne and I share this vision, when we set out to try and create an opportunity to foster collaboration, we did recognize that there are some limitations in the research world, depending on where you are geographically, who you might be working for, 9 to 5, so to speak, that there weren't as many opportunities to share ideas and build ideas as we would like there to be. And that was a driving force behind what we built here today. And what we quickly realized in perhaps, I believe, our very first sort of roundtable discussion is there was a real gap between what the academic community was able to provide from an educational standpoint and what the employers were looking for from a skill set from when those folks came into the workforce. And what you're going to hear today is sort of a culmination of that sort of drive and assessment process in building that bridge, in trying to provide resources to the academic community to supplement the great work they're already doing, but was specifically geared towards those skills that the employers want. And obviously, we're going to hear more about what the employers are looking for. And we believe as we can sort of shrink that gap between existing skills and required skills, we will just speed up the time of research and development, and this is something that will benefit everybody involved. Yeah. So obviously, this collaboration, this work, these efforts, while altruistic and needed, do not happen without the wonderful support from all of you joining us today, all of our speakers, and of course, all of our partners who join and contribute and support us in so many ways. It's impossible to name them all. But on this slide here, you see many of the names of folks who are contributing and supporting and sharing in our vision and goals for our organization. As I like to say, if you'd like to see your company's name up there, give us a call, let us know. Happy to discuss that. But also, if there's a name up here that is a company that you might be familiar with, that you think might be a good partner for you, well, please reach out to Joanne or myself. We love to make those introductions. It's really what drives much of our organization, is this collaborative environment. We want to introduce people. We want to connect people. We want to see ideas foster and ideas develop faster than maybe they currently are. So before I turn this over back to Joanne, I just want to say once again that long before the pandemic and long before we were all sort of tethered to our Zoom, cameras, we were pushing hard for a global community to come together to solve problems. Certainly, we are not sitting here saying we are contributing to the solutions that are being developed in the COVID world, but the model in which we have built this mirrors much of what is happening now globally. And I say that because if any of you have ideas, thoughts, problems, challenges that you are working on that you think need addressing, I'm going to encourage you again to reach out to us. There is no one better than Joanne in bringing together the right people for the right discussion to address the difficult problems. So before I turn it over, thank you again, everyone, for joining us. Thank you to Sree and Don for your time. Carla and Ray, you guys just doing unbelievable work, and excited for the conversation. So thank you.
Thank you, Michael. We've had a really good time building this, I have to say, and I will just share that when we got started, the idea was to explore our close community, build upon relationships that, anything that you can imagine is going on in our region, and everyone's already collaborating nationally and internationally. So to help people find each other around different topics has been really valuable. And since you may be familiar with kintsugi, the idea of putting things back together with gold so they're actually more beautiful than before they broke. And we feel like we're doing that in coming out of a COVID life. And we're doing some great programs coming up and tying it to a gap that everyone has told us about. Every single entity, every university, every company we spoke to regionally is the dearth of lab space, and lab space for students and lab space for companies coming out of incubators, which is to me pretty exciting because you're talking about funded companies now. And so there have been efforts and there are different activities going on to help build the kind of plug and play lab office suite, shared coffee pot communities, and we are part of that. We are bringing together builders like Skanska, lab designers, workforce development people, and so on to see, what is the facility we need? How do we get it done? And I would just share that when we got started, I called folks in other cities like New Orleans and Tucson and Western Massachusetts and places that were not New York or Boston to see what they were doing to stimulate this interaction. And they all had some kind of a big idea, a big partnership that would involve 17 different partners and so on. And they knew the partners, they knew where the money was going to come from, and they didn't work out. And when you ask why they didn't work out, the answer was always because the people couldn't get along with each other. So I so appreciate Michael's patience in us gently developing many really interesting relationships so that as we take on a large project, we have a much greater opportunity to get through issues when they arise, because we're all grown-ups and we know there will be issues, but if we really like working together, we will figure them out. So I won't go any further than that, but just that this is a monthly session we're going to be holding on tomorrow's life science workforce. Next month is going to be on building internships and then really thinking through, particularly for young companies, how do you figure out how to bring in an intern and make a good experience for them. And then we'll actually have a series of charrettes around, okay, if we build a lab facility, what does it need to be? What do you want for your institution? What do you want for your institution? Is there a way to build something we can share? We don't know that we'll necessarily lead the whole program, and get the project done, but we believe we can bring the people together who could make it happen. So we'll see how that goes. So I will continue on. I won't go into detail about these events, but appreciate you all being here today. I'm going to actually introduce, and you can take the slides down now, Matt. I'm going to introduce Carla Romney, who is the co-chair of our Career Consortium.
Thank you, Joanne and Michael and everyone else that's here today. It's great to be with people in community again. It seems like it's been forever, and I can't wait for the time when we can actually begin to do some of these kinds of events in person again. I, along with Ray, co-chair the Career Consortium, which is a seamless, borderless initiative, as Joanne always likes to say. I'm speaking to you, as some of you heard at the beginning, when you may have signed in, from just outside of Boston. But so obviously we're spanning as Joanne moves to Pennsylvania and whatnot. This truly is a borderless, seamless initiative. Thank goodness for Zoom. But my lifelong, really, passion and interest is in developing a biomedical science, life science workforce in Westchester. I grew up, I was born and bred, and my mom and my brother still live in Westchester now, when I tell my story because I think it's relevant. I'll give you a quick snapshot. But growing up I went to Ardsley High School, which is a good high school. And my high school guidance counselor when I was a high school junior said, if you're interested in the life sciences, you have to leave New York. I was really interested in biomedical engineering. She's like, you need to go to Boston. There's nothing here for you. And that was not what I wanted to hear at that point in my life, especially with a number of my friends staying relatively local after high school. But my guidance counselor sadly was right. And ever since then, I've been looking to build a community, and both an academic community as well as a community of young people, and young people broadly writ, if you will, meaning from elementary, middle, high school into the undergraduate, both community college and 4-year, into graduate school, into early postdoc, and into early faculty positions. That's a really long spectrum. But looking at how we can make Westchester have a sustainable biomedical workforce, that ecosystem that supports people like the younger version of me coming up and moving into and through careers in the life sciences. And I ultimately have really made my life up here in the Boston area because of the wealth of opportunity that there is here. I'm on the faculty and have been since 2000 at Boston University School of Medicine, which is a robust academic environment that is particularly entrepreneurial in its outlook towards the life sciences and has incubated a number of really interesting spin-offs. But perhaps more important and relevant, I also spent 5 years commuting between here and New York when I was the associate dean at Fordham in New York, when I was trying to manage a lot of elder care issues for my mom in New York as well. So I really do become well acquainted with the ecosystem. And it's what compelled me at the very first meeting where Joanne and Michael had a gathering to say, no, one of the things you really need to think about is the pipeline. And I hate the analogy, but it's true. How do we make the people that can support a local industry? because without the people, the companies can't thrive. And so my driving academic passion is really that idea. How do we bring together the stakeholders? How do we get the information to the learners in that cycle? How do we bring together industry? And how do we get academia and industry to talk to one another, to facilitate the interactions so that the academics are providing the people with the skills that industry needs? And so that's why I'm so excited to be here to hear from Sree and Don today on their perspectives on this. The Career Consortium itself, and I welcome you to check out the website on the Westchester Biotech Project's website, basically looks at the whole continuum from really high school through the various kinds of undergraduate and career training pathways, through graduate school, through for people that are doing the PhD route, into postdocs, into established investigator roles. And we look at that trajectory and try to provide programming to support people along various points of those key transitions. And if you remember the slide that Joanne had up just a moment ago, you don't need to put it back up again. But it's this idea of career transitions and trying to keep people in that trajectory moving towards sustainable employment and work and education. And so in that spirit, Ray and I have been working together for quite a while to really try to build this consortium and move it forward in ways where we build that community of thinkers and doers for Westchester and beyond. And so I think I'll give Ray a moment to introduce himself. My co-partner in crime.
Yes, partner in crime. I love it. Thank you so much, Carla. And good morning, everybody. It's wonderful to see some familiar faces again, and welcome everybody. I am Raymond Houston. I am the Dean for the School of Mathematics, Science and Engineering at Westchester Community College. It's weird to say that I'm starting my 5th year as the Dean, and why that's significant is because one of the first things I was asked to do as Dean was to go to a meeting with this Westchester Biotech project. And the first thing I remember when my boss asked me to go, and she gave me the information, and I said, 8 o'clock, really? I'm not a morning person. Once you get to know, you will know I am not a morning person at all. And I live in what I call upstate Manhattan. I'm in Inwood, which is at the top of Manhattan Island. And I had to drive to the Fordham Westchester location. So to be there for an 8 o'clock meeting, and I said, okay, I can't tell my new boss no. So I'm going to check this out. And it was a situation similar to this, and we were in a room and we were going around introducing each other, and it had been fairly recently to that meeting. I had been doing a tour of some of our lab spaces on our campus, and I remember walking into one of our labs, and I said to myself, okay, I see hair, I see fire, I see stuff everywhere. Like, what is going on? And talking with some of my faculty, we were talking about their commitment to safety and some of the challenges that they have working with students to make sure they're working in a safe laboratory environment. Some of it is structural, some of it is the way the lab was designed, where input was not taken from faculty in one of the lab spaces, and so sight lines are poor, in a couple of the lab spaces. And so that gave birth to what probably one of the bigger contributions I've had to this is I'm working on the safety certificate. I'm going to backtrack just a little bit about my story. I grew up in Southern West Virginia, moved to Western Pennsylvania, which, as a lot of folks know, that's now a big medical hub at this point. I was going to be a pharmacist, and I'm clearly not a pharmacist. I spent most of my time trying to avoid going into education. I come from a family of educators, and yet here we are. I ended up moving to New York to do my doctorate in math education and finish that, and soon after got the dean's position. But I've been at WCC since 2010. I served as math faculty, but my interest in science actually comes back. It's gone a long ways back, and I actually spent some of my first professional experiences once I finished my undergrad were actually in wet chemistry laboratories. And I spent about 1.5 years actually processing samples from the Deutsche Bank building down near Ground Zero for a lab company in Pennsylvania. So I've been in the field. I've had some field experience with working with this type of area. And my job right now is to work with folks like yourselves and with Carla to provide opportunities for our students at WCC in Westchester County. One of the things that I always like to point out to folks is we're part of the SUNY system, State University of New York, which is 64 campuses, 30 community colleges. We're the 4th largest community college in the system. Nassau and Suffolk are the largest two. Actually, it's Suffolk and Nassau are the largest two. So out on Long Island. So we have, 3 of the 4 largest community colleges are close by. And in my area, at WCC, the 2nd largest degree program is the liberal arts math science degree. And so we have a large population of students that are interested. Unfortunately, 2/3 of those students are wanting to go into nursing. And I'm not saying that unfortunately because of, it's bad that they want to go into nursing, but kind of like to Carla's point, a lot of those students are strong students and don't know of other opportunities that they have. They don't know of other paths that are available to them. And so I think one of my missions as the dean is to provide as many opportunities and facilitate those opportunities as possible for those students to really kind of explore and see what else is out there, to consider going on and getting a bachelor's degree in biology and then going into graduate work. We are fortunate to have a number of federal grants and federal programs where students have research opportunities in the summers and beyond. And some of those programs are designed for students to go to pursue doctorates. Like that is the main mission of some of those programs. But I think a lot of our students, would do really well working in the biotech industry. And so I think for us in academia, one of the things I always like to say, especially to Joanne and Carla, is that often academia is a cruise ship. We don't we don't turn on a dime. It's very difficult sometimes to make changes in academia. We don't make changes as quickly as folks in industry, I think, sometimes are able to do. That being said, there are things that we can do. And I think there's some things that we need to accelerate a bit that we've been sitting on. WCC is at a very interesting time. We are celebrating our 75th anniversary this year, actually. We're actually going to undergo a name change in the spring. I have no idea what it is. They won't tell anybody. So I'm going to find out in like April with everybody else. But we're really looking at what are the ways that we as the college can think about our next 50 to 75 years. What are the things that we can change? And I think the science areas is something that's very big. I can speak to one of the new folks that we brought into our biology faculty was interested in biotech. And that was one of the things that my boss, the provost at WCC, was like, okay, it'd be really good for us to have something involved with biotech. So we're at a position where we're getting poised to, provide a lot of support and students, like Carla said, the pipeline. We get these students from high schools coming through the community college, and still when they get to college, they're not really sure what they want to do. And so providing opportunities for them to explore and say, hey, this looks like something I'd be interested in doing. So I think it's really important that we have to give them the opportunity, like what Carla said that she didn't have. And I think we'd have a really strong chance of keeping students in Westchester, because one of the other things about our students don't want to leave. I have a hard time getting them out of my college. And it's not because they're not ready to, they're ready to graduate. They're completing their degree and they're like, well, I don't want to leave. And I'm like, but you've got to leave. It's now time for you to move on to the next phase. They don't want to leave Westchester County. They really do not want to leave this area. They want to be able to stay in this area. So I think anything we can do to help them, I think is going to be great. So working with fabulous partners such as yourselves is going to be exciting to provide them with those opportunities. Talking a little bit about the safety certificate that Carla and I have been working on. I can't believe we've been working on it for this long, but it's actually finally coming to fruition. COVID had caused a little hiccup, I think, with it, but we are at the point where we're working on it. Basically, our safety certificate, it's working on essential skills in the laboratory, not only for education environment, but as for folks enter the workforce. We want folks to feel like they are prepared to walk in day one and have a really strong grasp on safety procedures in a laboratory environment. Our next phase of it is an in-person part of the certificate, and that is scheduled for May 17th and 18th of this year. I say scheduled for because, well, that's as of today at 10:28 a.m. We will see if we can still do that in May. We're looking forward to it. We already had the first phase of the certificate fairly recently. It went really well. And we're just excited to be able to expand the certificate to more folks and hopefully even possibly offering it as a micro-credential through WCC. So just really excited about that. And I'm excited to hear from Sree and Dawn. And I'm going to turn it back over to, I think I go back to Joanne.
Well, thank you, Ray, and thank you, Carla. And I'll say we don't always spend this much time sharing the process, but I think today was the right day, and I learned things about you I didn't know, Ray. So thank you for that. I'll just flesh out. The certificate actually has 5 parts. A lot of it can happen online, but it's a lab notebooks, aseptic technique, which does have to be done in person, sustainability in the lab, and understanding the drug development process. So it's a 4. Each one you can get certificates for, but really the mini credential or the micro credential is all 5. Yes, and so it's. I would say it's literacy. I think if you can go to a job interview and say, well, what part of the drug development process are you in? That puts you ahead of somebody who can't ask that question. So I'm excited about this, and I won't go into any more backstory, but it is funny. Over a drink sometime, we'll share with everybody. I would like to introduce Sree Kant. Sree, if you'd like to pull up your slides and share your story. We invited Sree to speak because he's running a company in the Hudson Valley with decentralized labs and everything. You're going to hear about that. And so this is not unusual. We have come across a number of individuals who are running biotech companies based in their homes in Westchester. I don't want to give anything away, Sree, you probably have an office, but but this is not unusual. And so it's a model that we may not be aware of, and these are the companies that are going to really grow. This is where the seeds are. So go ahead, Sree. Thank you.
Thanks, Joanne, and thanks for having me on this. And I'd love to. The conversation was super interesting, and I had some thoughts as Carla, Ray, and Michael, and you're speaking. So I'll probably talk about that as well, because I have a lot of interest in driving more life science activity, both from a early research perspective and also in terms of overall growing the commercial life science activity in the New York region. And I've worked with New York Bio and others for a long period of time. Rather unsuccessfully, I'm afraid, if you have to compete with Boston and San Francisco, and there's some wounds we can talk about as well. And the company and the lab is not as much of my home and garage based, Joanne, and I'll say a little more about that as well. So I thought I'll do a few things today. One, I'll share a little bit of the science of what we do with you as well, because I don't think any conversation is relevant without at least knowing what exactly we're trying to do here, and share how we built this company over the last year and a half, and how we thought about talent and how we're going to acquire talent, the kind of talent we need, how do we work with academia, and since that's a conversation that came up as well, because a lot of our science came from academia in the first place, and so forth. I'll also share how we're thinking about talent acquisition as we go forward, even share what our talent needs are in the immediate future. So I think that could be interesting, and obviously open up for discussion on anything that you guys would like to talk about. All right. I think I encountered the thing that Joanne had mentioned, but now that she tells me how to do this, it's great. So I'll tell a little bit about BAKX, and I built BAKX Therapeutics about a year and a half ago. And to Joanne's point, it started off in my house. The first address for BAKX was my house. I'm still trying to get that address out of all correspondence and have our new address, right? But it started off with two people, me and my scientific co-founder, who's a PI at Albert Einstein, who's Evers Gavatiotis, and I'll say a bit about him as well. And then over time, we built a rockstar team, which is spanning New York and Boston area, most of the science being in Boston. I'm looking to build more of the corporate infrastructure out here in Kingston, New York, where I live. And all of this was built in the COVID times. So there, for a long time, we actually hadn't even met in person, a lot of the people who came together to build this company. We raised financing, we advanced the science, we worked with a bunch of CROs across the world. We are building our own lab as well now in the Boston Watertown area. We have a small space we're looking to expand, and so forth. So it's been a super cool journey. From my perspective, my background is I've been in pharma and biotech for near on 20 years, working in various capacities. I was with the Boston Consulting Group, advising biopharma companies across the world on corporate strategy, R&D strategy, and so forth. Then went to Pfizer, and I was with Pfizer for a long time, doing portfolio strategy as well as doing external innovation and Pfizer, and looking at deals for Pfizer. But I ended up gravitating more towards the early side because that's where this super cool, fun stuff was. I like working with scientists more than I like working on the sales and business side, and that's where the fun was. And a lot of that drove me to thinking of, where are we finding the novel targets, cutting edge science that we're going to work on and translate, which was happening in Boston with all of the VCs. But from a pharma perspective, I was looking to do the same thing, which is work with academia, build novel kinds of relationships with academia rather than the cookie cutter approach of saying, I'll take your stuff and after that we're done. You go your way and I'll go my way, kind of a thing of how pharmas work, right? And it's complicated. So that I did that. I worked with another Life Biosciences for a while, which is an investment platform for age-related diseases, and finally built BAKX. And when I built BAKX, it was trying to bring together some of my learnings through all of these years and think of how can you work very closely with academic investigators and make them part of your journey. And because I do believe that the PIs who worked on this for 15, 20 years and did the discovery have a role to play, and a very strong role to play, much as as our projects advance into development and so on and so forth, though the skill sets are different. So that was the genesis of BAKX. So what do? Our vision is to be the apoptosis company, and for those of you who are familiar, the apoptosis in Greek is fall off a cliff, but basically it's the body's way to maintain the balance between cell life and death, and apoptosis is cell death, is the natural way in which the body goes to cell death, right? And people have been working on this for many years, but we believe now that because of what we are uniquely able to do, we can unlock the full therapeutic power of this natural biological pathway, right? And we pulled together the world's leading scientists in this area, as well as supplemented that with expertise in structure-based drug design and computational drug discovery. And that's an important piece that I'll talk about in a little bit as we think about talent in life sciences and how much computation and math, Ray, since you mentioned math, is starting to play a role in what we do, right? So a little bit of the science, and I'm not going to go very deep into it, but when we talk about apoptosis and regulated apoptosis is the way the body maintains the balance between cell life and death. So we all know cells die, and and they do need to, because there is a turnover of cells in our body, and there's certain proteins which are very relevant or which are driving cell death. And those are, for simplicity, I'll call them the cell death proteins, which are the BAKX and BAK proteins. Yeah. But you don't want unregulated cell death. Otherwise, as you can imagine, like in progeria or in aging, you're seeing cells dying, and that's not the degeneration that you want. So you have the cell survival proteins, which are the BCL2, BCLXL, and CL1, and a few other proteins like that. And all of these are in the mitochondrial apoptosis pathway, which regulate or which block the cell death proteins. Now, the way to think about this is as like driving a car, right? I mean, you have the brakes and you have the accelerator. So you need both of those, and you need to use those judiciously as you maintain your car going at a certain speed and highway, etc. You don't want to be doing one thing excessively. So that's sort of how I think about the body maintaining homeostasis as well. But what happens in cancer? Cancer cells tend to be stressed. Yeah. So that's not like the normal course of living, normal course of driving your car. And the analogy here is one of the things that I like saying, which recently got quoted, is it's sort of like, if you guys remember Thelma and Louise, it's like that car which is on the cliff, right? There's Thelma and Louise with this car, they're looking to drive it off the cliff. Now, that's a cancer cell. How do you drive that off the cliff? There are a couple of things that you'll need to do, right? You need to take your foot off the brake, and you need to press on the accelerator. Now, if you take that analogy, most people in the industry, as they think about, when they've worked on apoptosis, have focused on one side of this. They've all focused on just taking their foot off the brake. If you're going with that strategy, what do? You find the brake. One of the brakes is BCL2, and there's a drug which is marketed based on inhibiting BCL2, which is venetoclax. So you can take your foot off this brake. The issue with this strategy is this is not the only brake. It could be BCL2, it could be BCLXL, it could be MCL1, or it could be BCLW, or it could be something else. So depending on your cancer, there could be different brakes. So which brake do you take your foot off, number one? Number two, these brakes tend to mutate as well. Cancer is extremely devious, as you all know. So BCL2 protein mutates to BCLXL, to MCL1. So if you take your foot off one brake, there's something else going on. But the good thing is, on the other side of this equation, we have BAKX, which is BAKX is present in pretty much all tumors and all cancers. And that's what we are going after. This is the differential strategy that we're doing. So most people have been able to understand one part of this apoptosis pathway. We have the more complete understanding because we're working. We understand the brake side, but we also understand the accelerator side, right? So I'll stop with the analogies there, but basically this is to tell you that how we're thinking about cancer, why we're different, and what are the things that we're doing. Most pharma who have been working in this pathway have not been able to target BAKX simply because the mechanism of BAKX activation was not very well understood, and it took a lot of work from the computational perspective to understand the structure of BAKX and how BAKX is activated and so on and so forth, which is very proprietary to the knowledge. That knowledge is very proprietary to some of our scientific founders and the team that we've built, right? So that's what we do. I'm happy to say in the year and a half, we've done a Series A with some very progressive investors. We also have an industry partnership with Ipsen, which allows us to drive our lead program, which is a pretty sizable partnership. So we're pretty well funded. And all of this happened, to Joanne's point, starting off sitting in my little study in Bearsville in the Hudson Valley. But now we're building, we've got lab space in Watertown. We are expanding as well in the next few months, and we're bringing in a lot of people. A little bit around the kind of talent that we have and the kind of talent that we're looking to bring in, right? Just to give you a picture of what it looks like in a biotech of this sort, which is just getting kicked off. The second employee who came on even before we got the financing was Jessie English, who's our Chief Scientific Officer. She's got more than 25 years of experience driving oncology drug discovery and development programs, been at Pfizer, the two different Mercks, Dana-Farber, Schering-Plough, Tilos, etc. The other person here is Yibing Shan, who's our Chief Computational Scientist, who spent more than 20 years he was one of the founder members of D. Shore Research, which is probably the mothership of computational work in drug discovery. And then Yibing joined us because he just saw the potential of this pathway and how the work that he's done could complement what we're doing. I'm not going to go through each one of them, but you can see by the functions under their names how we're sort of covering the different aspects of drug discovery in an early stage company, right? And all of these people have 15 to 30 years of experience, depending on who they are, in some of the bigger pharma companies, as well as like Pfizer, AstraZeneca, Merck, Novartis, etc., as well as experience in smaller startups like Silicon Therapeutics and Roivant in some cases, or Reverie Labs and so forth, where there's been a computational bent to what they do. So that's our team. And even in terms of our scientific founders, and this is Lauren Walensky, who's the co-founder and chair of our scientific advisory board. He's at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, and Ebripidis Gavathiotis at Albert Einstein. These are the two guys who worked on the BAKX protein for near on 15 years. It started with Stan Korsmeyer doing this at Dana-Farber, and then Lauren forwarding that, continuing to work on that research, and then Everest later taking it forward as he moved on from Lauren's lab, going on to set up his own lab. And this is how science advances. And now we're in a place where we're taking the work that they did and looking to translate it into actual therapeutics. Ross and Amit are in New York. Ross at Memorial Sloan Kettering, and Amit at Albert Einstein and Montefiore. They're probably amongst the world's leaders in heme malignancies, and we are going into hematological malignancies as some of our first few indications that we'll go into the clinic with, and which is where their expertise, both as researchers and clinicians, becomes super important for us. Pat LaRusso, some of you might have heard and know of her. She's at Yale, and then medical oncologist for near on 30 years, and probably amongst the foremost experts in early stage clinical design. She leads Yale's phase 1 center as well, and she's helping us think through, as we go into the clinic, how do we think about indications and setting up our trials. Now, Steve and Lonnie are very interesting, and Ray, you might find this interesting as well, because they're both mathematicians. They started off in Microsoft, then looked at Google, then decided that they want to go into life sciences, went to Harvard, and then did their PhDs, went to UT Southwestern, worked there for a while, then they're in UCSF, and they do some pretty amazing stuff. They're doing computational systems biology work. I've known them for many years and looked to collaborate and brought them along. Now, this is a group of people who come at this problem from different angles, and they really like and respect each other, and that's one of the things that we built. And I showed the industry folks in the previous page, and they bring a very real experience of having made drugs, which they've taken into clinic and gotten approvals from. And these guys come in more from the very target and biology perspective, and working closely together is very integral to what we do. Last bit, we're about 8 people now, and we're continuing to expand. And over the next year, we expect to get up to 22 people. We have a bunch of consultants and contractors who help us as well on various aspects. We have 4 CROs across the world that we're working with as well. But some of the key capabilities that we're bringing in is what you see on the right-hand side. The ones in gray, we're looking to more on the corporate side. I'm looking to build in the Kingston, Hudson Valley area. And then the ones in blue are more on the scientific side. We have decided now, in the beginning, when I built this company, it was more of, I want to build a Hudson Valley biotech and we're going to set up our labs and everything here because I wanted to build a New York company, but it's to some of the points that Carla is making, it's not easy. The talent is where it is, and then talent begets other talent. So there is I think there is a stepwise approach to how we build critical scientific talent and critical mass of scientific talent here in the Hudson Valley. But for now, we are driving all of our science out of Boston and so forth. A lot of the people that we recruited before, and I'm super excited about all of them. All of them are rock stars, and they came because we knew them, right? The first few people are easier because you know who they are. You work with somebody, and I can always pick 3 people that I can call on anytime who worked with me for 10 years, who like me and would say like, okay, I'll leave what I'm doing and come because you're starting something cool. Same thing that Jessie can do. So when we wanted, we were able to get a bit of our dream team. But as we get to the next level now, then it becomes a question of how do we source talent. There's a war for talent, which I'm sure Don can talk about more, especially in the life sciences area and in Boston and San Francisco, given all of the infusion of funds into biotech and all of the big VCs. So when you build a company like that from the ground floor by an entrepreneur, going in there and finding this talent and bringing them in is it's super challenging. But like I said, talent begets other talent. So if you have good people want to work with good people. So we'll bring them along, right? So yeah, it's been a super exciting journey for us. We see ourselves growing, like I showed you, from the people side. We also will probably do another larger financing round towards the end of the year, and we have a lot of interest from across the industry in what we're doing. So I wouldn't rule out more partnerships as we build as well. So yeah. I'll stop there, and I'm happy to talk about, take questions, talk about aspects of company building, more specifically with BAKX, but also in general from my experience working at Pfizer in New York and generally thinking about this for a few years.
Well, thank you, Sree. That's a really, really interesting snapshot. And just while this slide is still up, those of us who are in academia, you can see in the blue areas, these are the kinds of jobs Sree is saying that he needs to hire for. And so I'm going to follow up with you separately, Sree, to talk about 1 or 2 of those fields. I think it'd make a great blog post to talk about what makes a good medicinal chemist for you, right? And a little bit more of that detail. But I want to move on now to Don Alexander. Thanks,
sorry, on that, Joanne, all of these are on our website. The job descriptions are there, so we're very clear of what exactly we're looking for. But happy to get into more details anytime you need.
That sounds great, and I will do that before I ask you for more time. Although you're in the club now, so I'll be asking for quite a bit, I promise. Let's see. Don, would you like to share your screen? And Don Alexander is at GeneCoda. He's in the Raleigh-Durham area of North Carolina. I'm gonna let you say more about yourself, Don, but I really want to appreciate you coming with the overview of how the whole landscape is changing and where we are today. There you go.
That's great, Joanne. And I want to just start out by thanking you, as well as the other members, Carla, Ray, Michael of the Westchester Biotech Project, to be able to spend some time with you here today. Sree's presentation was great. What we're going to attempt to do is provide everyone with a bit of a, I guess I'm going to call it a macro context within the construct of the industry overall, what we're seeing, maybe a few stories, but you know, being in the Research Triangle Park, North Carolina area, we're also a growing, you know, maybe second tier type of region with respect to biopharmaceutical product development. And it's really been interesting. I've lived here for about 30 years. We're actually going to be getting following suit with I think about 3 to 5 inches of snow tomorrow. So we'll be sharing some of that with our friends in the Northeast here on Friday. What I thought I would do is, like Sree did, is you know, as we think about what employers want as kind of the subject, is give you just a little bit of background on our firm, and I'll put the slide up. But in essence, our firm GeneCoda, so I've been in the recruiting business a little over 20 years, focused exclusively on the life sciences sector. And of course, the definition's up there, but that broadly includes biopharmaceutical product development, medical technologies, diagnostics, and oftentimes the tools that support those at the research-based industry. And so we've seen a lot of different client prototypes over the years. A lot of the firms we tend to work with oftentimes are smaller to mid-sized organizations. So, you know, I guess if there's a bias, that would probably be the case here. The other side of that is that we've seen a lot of different functional role types over the years. And I often joke with people that at one point or another in that 20-year career, we probably placed a title that you'd find in virtually any virtual biotech company that's been built to date. Generally speaking, we do place people that are very, very senior by just raw number of years of experience in the industry. And we're classically known as, I guess, what you might want to call a headhunting firm. So we go out, clients hire us in essence to go out and help them locate professional talent. So that's a bit about our company, and happy to take any questions about that later on. What we'll jump into briefly is a macro shot. We just put this together this past weekend, so hopefully you can see it okay. I want to explain what you're looking at, if you can see it okay, so that you have some basis for understanding this. We are in the life sciences industry, an extremely robust industry from a hiring point of view. The blue bars you'll see in this graph are the quarters as of the most recent quarter 4 of 2021, hit a high watermark for the past 3 years of data that we track. Now, what this data that you're looking at is advertisements, job advertisements. We have secured a source called MZ that has now merged with a Boston-based company called Burning Glass. And in essence, what they do is take, they screen scrape the internet for job advertisements. So Sree's job posts will become part of the data that you see here. And they aggregate those, and you're able to kind of slice and dice different market aspects and segments. So what we do then is take the I call it the life sciences industry, really. So we take about 15 or 16 different codes that are called North American Industry Classification Codes, which the federal government uses to help understand industries by sector. And so we take this data and we look at it on a quarterly basis. Now I've sent Joanne the link to the full report, which will be out, the fourth quarter report. This is data from that, but that'll be out at the beginning of February. And you're welcome to sign up. There's no charge to do that. You'll get an email from us once a quarter with the data that you see here today, plus some additional analysis that goes into it. But I wanted to present the overall market, what that looks like. And I think one part to note in particular is the second quarter of 2020, which I think most people refer to, at least I do, as the COVID quarter, when COVID really matriculated into, the United States, our environment at large. And you'll see, within that red bar construct that moves down in Q2 2020 because of the fact that a lot of people, were really just stabilizing at that point in time. They were trying to understand what it meant for their business, how they were going to do things differently. And ever since that point in time, we have seen marked increase in categorical job growth. And the comps, one thing I did want to point out about this also, this particular graph, is that with these kinds of numbers at 600,000 quarterly, reaching up to 700,000 quarterly posts, I do think that the comps are going to be a little bit more difficult moving forward. So when we have this conversation, maybe a year from now, whatever the case may be, I do think the comparisons are going to start to get a little bit more challenging just because of the density and the extremely rapid growth rate we've seen over the past, say, 9 to 12 months. To dig into this just a little bit deeper, we'll look at subsector performance also. And this chart goes back 3 years of data. And what we can see in this chart that's a little bit different is the actual subcomponents of what the report shows us. So this gives us a bit of the growth in magnitude across different segments of the actual industry. So when you see RTM, what that means is research, testing, and medical labs. And example companies that may fall within this framework would be companies like LabCorp and Quest, okay? When we see PMM, the blue stack there, that's pharmaceutical manufacturing, pharmaceutical medicine and manufacturing. Of course, companies like Sree mentioned, Pfizer, GlaxoSmithKline are going to be some of the companies that are going to fall within that framework. And then the final category, the green, MDE, is medical device and equipment manufacturers. And you're going to find company names like Medtronic and Stryker that fall within that framework. So one of the things I wanted to point out with both of these slides is really, in the end, if you were to sum this up, when we're considering what employees want, at the end of the day, it's people, and a lot of them. Okay. What we're going to dive into now is a few of the skill sets that the data shows us, both from I guess what you would call a hard skill point of view and what MZ classifies as common skills. We'll go through those definitions briefly also. What you're looking at here now are the top hard skills. And what this really means is that this graph is really the pure incidence of the keywords that you might find in job posts. Okay, so the frequency found in the job post itself, and again, this data is across the United States. I should have pointed that out earlier. Hard skills, of course, are specific. They're learnable, measurable. They're often industry or occupation specific abilities related to a particular position. So when we look at this particular data, one of the things that struck me when I looked at it, and this is, by the way, again, Q4 data of 2021, so very recent data. One of the things that struck me is that there were quite a few quality-based keywords and terms within the construct of the overall grouping. So when we see things like GMP, good manufacturing practice, SOP, standard operating procedure, process improvement, we are seeing quite a few different advertisement posts for these types of keyword terms. And then we also, I think it's important to notice the frequency in job posts versus the light blue line, which is frequency in the profiles of people that are out there, which is also another, I should have mentioned, screen scraping activity that MZ and Burning Glass does, is you can actually start to see where there's a discrepancy in the frequency of the actual job post types versus the profiles, at least that their data systems have collected. So when we see things like pharmaceuticals, GMP, clinical trials, auditing, biology, these are all areas where there are more posts than there are people. So these are the hard skills. Now we're going to go on to the common skills. And the common skills definitions, you'll see, again, this is much different, but common skills can be self-taught and usually do not necessitate a certain level of education, such as a master's degree or other certifications or credentials that good people like Ray set us up for. They're essential in many industries and occupations, such as problem solving and project management. And in this particular slide, you'll see things like problem solving. One of the things that really struck me when I looked at this particular data was the word communications, which that word was found in almost 188,000 postings over the last quarter, which represented 50% of all posted jobs. So again, I think we can discern from that communications is clearly on the minds of employers in the life sciences sector, and the frequency and profiles, again, these are the numbers, a very different outcome in terms of how often that's being mentioned in the profiles themselves. What I also did in terms of the data, to step aside from that for a minute, is to think about macro trends that we're seeing. So I'm going to put these up on the board, and I don't think these are going to probably come as a shock to anyone that's probably on this call. We've touched on some already. Sree and Ray had touched on mathematics and data science and how that's being used in the industry. We just placed, coincidentally, head of a VP of medicinal chemistry for a client of ours out of Emory University that is combining traditional synthetic chemistry-based drug discovery with a machine learning algorithm. So they take prototypically compounds that have failed in clinical trials for one reason or another, say toxicity. They'll figure out, I guess from a synthetic route, can we change X or Y and to make it the possibility of success in clinical trials much greater? And if they can, then they apply a machine learning layer to that to help them increase the possibility that they'll be successful, as well as hopefully reduce the time that it takes to actually discover drugs. So these kinds of things are going on in the industry today, and we clearly see them going on in the future. Clinical trials is a big one also that we see. A lot of decentralized efforts in clinical trials these days. COVID did a lot to the clinical trial marketplace in particular last year, but we're seeing a number of these technology trends, which I think are important in the overall, as you're thinking about developing careers and connecting people in earlier stages of their careers to what the demand in the market might be. These are some of the technology trends that we're seeing. Well, other trends that we're seeing, and these are not specific to a particular technology, but one of the things I've noticed, and this is true, I would say in recent weeks, and I say this not to get into debate about whether this is right or wrong, it just is, and what I'm going to say really goes more to the spirit of the supply and demand in the marketplace. So we're seeing a number of our clients requiring vaccinations in order to be hired, okay? And few exceptions to that are being made. Now, what this does is it is going to have the effect of reducing the workforce by those that won't, or I guess suppose can't in some cases, get vaccinated. So I don't have data around this, but clearly this is going to reduce the supply of professionals by that number of people within our industry who are not vaccinated. So we are seeing an increase in that, especially over the last few months. I recently read, and I can post this in the chat if you'd like, a great article from McKinsey called New Operating Model for Pharma. And I think much of this was probably known, but I thought it did a really good job in surveying participants that were part of the study to really see what the medium and long-term, 5 to 10 year trajectory kind of look like. And the article summary, just briefly, if you'll indulge me, more than 80% of those surveyed in this article said it was likely or very likely that companies will fully embrace agile ways of working. 70% feel that organizational structures will be radically simplified, and that may go to outsourcing and some of the things that have been mentioned. And the majority, albeit a smaller one, also feel that the traditional commercial model will no longer be a fit for purpose. So touch points with healthcare providers will be simplified, and companies will again outsource more components of the value chain to focus on their core capabilities. That was the main construct of a very exciting article. Again, I'll post that in the chat when we wrap here. Some customers are also asking interview questions around experience and the ability to work remotely. As we think about remote work and how our ecosystem is in fact changing. So companies might inquire about the environment in which one's worked, whether it's been principally office-based pre-COVID, and ask about how people have adjusted to a wholly or primarily work from home type environment. A client might ask, if I understand correctly, you've been working from a home office exclusively over the past 6 months. What's been your biggest challenge in making that transition, and what have you done to overcome this challenge? So we're seeing, again, more incidents of those questions appearing in potential interviews with employers. And I think it's also important to kind of wrap up the remote side with the idea that with remote work, I believe, at least with my client base, that employers are still in rapid learning mode about the tools. I know we're on a Zoom call here today, and most people are familiar with the video calls by now, but we're still in a rapid learning mode about tools, about education, training, the environment, how to onboard people successfully, and the flexibility that people seem to now require in a hybrid or holistically remote work-based environment. So I'm gonna wrap up then with this slide, which I'm gonna go back to the data sources that I mentioned earlier. This is the first time I've ever looked at this, and I thought it was really, really interesting. What I tried to do, and I hope you can see this, is use a little red arrow to point out where the main COVID inflection point was in the United States, March of 2020, roughly. So that'll be your first arrow. And then we wind up, I believe, in the October-November timeframe. It has trailed off, it looks like, a little bit. But if we take this from what has been fairly static over maybe a little bit of an increase over a 3-year period, and then look at what's happened over the past 2 years, this is just simply applying, and this is in the life sciences industry. This is the exact data set we used earlier. But what we did was we applied a remote job post filter. So the intelligence will go out there and say, hey, we're going to look for words like remote or home office or different areas that we can look at. And it just struck me as wow, because we went from about 6,000 posts to about 23,000 posts over a 2-year period in time, or almost a 4x increase. And again, that doesn't really show signs of slowing down that we've seen thus far. Maybe a little bit trailed off here, but now with Omicron, I expect that to probably jump back up a little bit more. So that's what I got today. I appreciate everybody's time. I really want to thank the Westchester Biotech Project, Joanne, Denise, Michael, Carla, and Ray. Your passion was very clear to me in the way you spoke. So your passion about bringing this group, this consortium together was extraordinary. And also co-panelist Sree Kant, exceptional presentations. And thank you very much for your time.